Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and I think I might have just broken my wrist trying to hold up all the books that I read this month for my thumbnail, because today is going to be my final November wrap-up. I of course already did 2 wrap-ups. I did my kind of mid-November wrap-up, and then I also did my Tome Topple wrap-up. I will leave both of them linked down below and up here, because while I will very shortly mention all of the books that I talked about in those wrap-ups, I just don't feel the need to go more in depth about them, because that is after all the reason why I split up my November wrap-up, because I wanted to talk more in depth about all the books that I read. Anyway, I read a total of 13 books this month, and 5 of those books were over 500 pages. So, safe to say, this is so far my most successful month overall this year. I think just page-wise, I read double the amount of pages that I have read in like my second most successful month, so to speak. So yeah, I'm pretty happy. And now let me just quickly get into the books that I talked about in my other wrap-ups, but that I still want to quickly mention. The first book I read this month was The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, which is a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, and I did give this 4 stars overall, but I just didn't like it as much as a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, but liked it a lot as a book because Margaret Atwood just has amazing writing. Then the second book I read this month was The Guinevere Deception by Kirsten White, which is the first book in the Camelot Rising series, which is an Arthurian retelling, and I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Camera, which is the first book in the Cursebreaker series, and I think I gave this like 3.5 4 stars. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and while I did enjoy it, it kind of has already pretty much faded away into the mist that is like the books that I enjoyed but that I don't really think are that special. Then I read The Folk of the Air series by Holly Black. I think that's what it's called, but it consists of The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and Queen of Nothing. This is of course a very hyped series, and while I do think like overall it's a solid 3.5 to 4 star series, I just do not think it quite deserves the hype it gets. But again, all my thoughts on this series are in the first November wrap-up that I did. Now moving on to my Tome Topple reads. The first 2 books that I read for Tome Topple were The Tower of Dawn and Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas, which are the last 2 books in the Throne of Glass series. And while I did more or less enjoy The Tower of Dawn, I gave it 3 stars. I gave 1 star to Kingdom of Ash. And while I do talk about both books in my Tome Topple readathon, if you want to know more about why I dislike this book so much, I also have a whole rant review uploaded, which I will also leave in the links down below and up there in the corner. And then the last book I read for Tome Topple was Emma by Jane Austen, and I gave this 2 stars because overall I was just incredibly bored during this book. But again, if you want to know my more in-depth thoughts on this, go and look at my Tome Topple wrap-up. So now we are at the books that I have not yet wrapped up. The first of which is Find Me Their Bones by Sarah Wolf, which is the second book to Bring Me Their Hearts. And I read the first book in July, and this one came out in November, and I did really enjoy it. I think I gave it 3.5 to 4 stars. I didn't quite enjoy it as much as the first book. This series, by the way, follows Sarah, who is a heartless, which means her heart has been taken by a witch and she has to do what a witch says. And to kind of get a pawn in the oncoming Witches Against Humans war, Sarah is sent to the capital of her country to literally steal the prince's heart and also make him a heartless. So yeah, that's the premise of this whole series. I would recommend it. It's just a really fun, quick ride. I really enjoy the dynamic between Sarah and the prince, even though there is a bit of insta-love there, but it's made fun of a little bit in the second book. So it's like very obvious that it's insta-love, but I still enjoyed it. I still enjoyed the dynamic, and I would still recommend it. It's like, just if you want something quick and fun that's easy to get into, maybe to get you out of a reading slump, and where you don't like expect crazy much world building, then this is definitely the right book or the right series for you. Then next I read Crown of Feathers by Nikki Paupleto, which follows our main character who wants to be a phoenix rider. And so yeah, that's something you don't see a lot in YA fantasy. You see a lot of like dragons, although we don't see as many dragons as we used to, which is kind of sad. But anyways, Phoenix Riders there definitely isn't a lot of, and also this is a YA fantasy that is kind of inspired by, I wanna say, Aztec culture, but at least like Mesoamerican high cultures, I would say. So that's something that I really enjoyed, because again, that's just something that you don't see a lot of in high fantasy, in YA high fantasy. And it's just a really different vibe from usual medieval kind of setting. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I loved our main character's kind of development. She went through a lot of character development, although I do think that she felt a little bit like, the way she was written felt a little bit on the younger side of YA, even though she was 16, but that might also just be because like nowadays YA characters are kind of written very old, so it just seems unusual to have a main character who doesn't act all grown up, but she definitely feels very young, but that might also be because she's a very naive main character. Then the two other perspectives that we also follow, I also enjoyed quite a bit. I even enjoyed the kind of girl disguising as a boy trope, which I'm kind of a little bit tired of by now because maybe I've just read too many of those this year, but like I feel like it's been a little bit overdone, although I did enjoy it. Like, I didn't mind it in this book because it wasn't as dramatic as this trope can usually be, so that was a nice change. And the only really negative thing that I have to say about this book is that, at least for me, the twists at the end were pretty obvious. Like, I saw it coming from pretty much the very beginning, but again, I see that quite a lot when it comes to twists, and me especially in YA books, that by now, actually the only author who can still get me with twists is Brandon Sanderson, because by now I have just read so many fantasy books that like all possible twists, it kind of go through them in my head, and I'm like, yeah, if none of them appear in this book, I'd be more surprised than if all of them appeared. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt from my side, but otherwise I would definitely recommend this book if you want a little bit of a different YA high fantasy. Then I have a reread, and that was Skyward by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first book, of course, in the Skyward series, and the second book came out at the end of November. I have by now finished it, but I started in December, so will be on my next reading wrap up. And oh my god, I still love this book so much. Although I did notice that I really don't pay attention to the way characters are described because I just don't care, and I get that that's kind of pretty privileged of me to say, because I think in my review of this book, which I have from last year, which I will leave linked down below as well and up here as well, in my review from last year I said that this book isn't that good with like diversity, and I still kind of stand by that. Like, most of the characters, as far as I can tell, are still white, but like one of them, no, not even one, the main side character is POC, and it completely went over my head because I just do not read the descriptions of characters. I do not care unless you like tell me every second page that a character's skin is white, or that a character's skin is brown, or that a character's skin is olive, or whatever. I do not care. I won't notice. I literally won't notice. I won't notice if a character is brown haired or blonde or brunette or whatever. I won't notice if a character has short hair or long hair. I won't notice anything. So that was kind of funny to notice this time around when reading it, and I still stand by it that Spencer is one of the best YA main characters that I have ever read about, because she is a very typical, a very tropey kind of obnoxious main character at the very beginning of the book, but she discovers so much about herself throughout the book that the development she goes through until the end is just crazy, and I love it so much. And I love Spence's and Jorgen's relationship, interactions, whatever you want to call it, so much as well. They're one of my favorite relationships in books ever, no matter if it's love relationship, if it's friendship, if it's enemies. I just love their dynamic so much. But yeah, so I will also leave the link to my review of that from last year down below. So then lastly, I read The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan, which is the 3rd book in the Wheel of Time series, and very, very slowly I'm making my way through the series, and I still have kind of mixed feelings. Like, overall, I do enjoy it. I do not have the need with adult high fantasy, epic fantasy. Like, I know high and epic fantasy technically is like different terms for the same thing, but for me epic fantasy is like adult 10+ books and just, you know, epic, and high fantasy is just everything that's high fantasy. So it's epic fantasy, so of course it's going to be very slow, and I'm not surprised that even in the 3rd book I don't feel like the story has really picked up. But so far I just feel like, I don't know, it's just rehashing the same plot over and over again, because you just have a journey at the beginning and then you have a fight at the end, and a journey at the beginning and a fight at the end, and I don't feel like we're moving anywhere yet. And even though it's 14 books and I know it's going to be slow, I still would wish that there was a little bit more plot. And maybe it's also because I just don't really like the characters so far, which I do not necessarily need with epic fantasy. I feel like I went in circles. Anyway, I do not necessarily need to like the characters with epic fantasy, but if I don't really have that much plot yet to latch onto, and I can't really latch onto the characters so far, it's just kind of slow going. But I still do intend to continue on with this, and yeah, we'll just see how it goes. But so far this is just like a 3-star epic fantasy series for me so far. And that was all of it. That was all the books that I read in November. And now let me just go very quickly through my draws out of my TBR jar. The first one is A Certain Uncertainty by Gaurav Suri and Harter Singh Bal. I butchered those names probably. I think it's called A Certain Uncertainty in English. Yeah, it's kind of a mathematics book. Then next I have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and lastly I have Selected Tales by Edgar Allan Poe. And I think I'm probably going to read Frankenstein this month because it's by far the shortest book. It's half the size of the other 2 books, and after all the big books that I read last month, I really feel like reading something shorter. So yeah. That was it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. Again, all the reviews, all the wrap-ups will also be linked in the description box down below, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!